Welcome everyone to the final week in our series on the life of David. Now we've covered a lot of ground with just this one guy, haven't we? There's a lot to learn from David, and I think we've done a lot of that. We've learned from the high moments of his life, like when he was anointed as a shepherd or when God gave him the Davidic covenant. And we also learned from some of the low moments in his life, like when he was a fugitive on the run from Saul, and just like last week, when we learned from some of the biggest mess-ups that he did. Again, though, there's just so much to learn from David. I could probably go a lot longer on just David, but I think it's time that we put him aside and start focusing on some other things, especially since Easter is coming up. So today we find ourselves in a moment that's maybe a bit of a cross between a high moment and a low moment for David. I do think that this is, for all intents and purposes, this is one of the higher moments of David's life. He's happy about what's going on, but maybe just in the background there's a little hint that things aren't going quite the way he would have preferred them. After all, we're talking today about the temple. David would have loved to build the temple himself, but God said no. But that doesn't mean David had no role in the temple, even without laying a single stone. David summoned all the officials of Israel to Jerusalem, the leaders of the tribes, the commanders of the army divisions, the generals and captains, the overseers of the royal property and livestock, the palace officials, the mighty men, and all the other brave warriors in the kingdom. David rose to his feet and said, "My brothers and my people, it was my desire to build a temple where the ark of the Lord's covenant, God's footstool, could rest permanently. I made the necessary preparations for building it, but God said to me, 'You must not build a temple to honor my name, for you are a warrior and have shed much blood. Yet the Lord, the God of Israel, has chosen me from among all my father's family to be king over Israel forever. For he has chosen the tribe of Judah to rule, and from among the families of Judah he chose my father's family. And from among my father's sons the Lord was pleased to make me king over all Israel. And from among my sons, for the Lord has given me many, he chose Solomon to succeed me on the throne of Israel, and to rule over the Lord's kingdom. He said to me, your son Solomon will build my temple and its courtyards, for I have chosen him as my son, and I will be his father. And if he continues to obey my commands and regulations as he does now, I will make his kingdom last forever. So now, with God as our witness, and in the sight of all Israel, the Lord's assembly, I give you this charge. Be careful to obey all the commands of the Lord your God, so that you may continue to possess this good land and leave it to your children as a permanent inheritance. And Solomon, my son, learn to know the God of your ancestors intimately. Worship and serve him with your whole heart and a willing mind. For the Lord sees every heart and knows every plan and thought. If you seek him, you will find him. But if you forsake him, he will reject you forever. So take this seriously. The Lord has chosen you to build a temple as his sanctuary. Be strong and do the work." Then David gave Solomon the plans for the temple and its surroundings, including the entry room, the storerooms, the upstairs rooms, the inner rooms, and the inner sanctuary, which was the place of atonement. David also gave Solomon all the plans he had in mind for the courtyards of the Lord's temple, the outside rooms, the treasuries, and the rooms for the gifts dedicated to the Lord. The king also gave Solomon the instructions concerning the work of the various divisions of priests and Levites in the temple of the Lord. And he gave specifications for the items in the temple that were to be used for worship. David gave instructions regarding how much gold and silver should be used to make the items needed for service. He told Solomon the amount of gold needed for the gold lampstands and lamps, and the amount of silver for the silver lampstands and lamps, depending on how each would be used. He designated the amount of gold for the table on which the bread of the presence would be placed, and the amount of silver for other tables. David also designated the amount of gold for the solid gold meat hooks used to handle the sacrificial meat, and for the basins, pitchers, and dishes, as well as the amount of silver for every dish. He designated the amount of refined gold for the altar of incense. Finally, he gave him a plan for the Lord's chariot, the gold cherubim whose wings were stretched out over the ark of the Lord's covenant. Every part of this plan, David told Solomon, was given to me in writing from the hand of the Lord. Then David continued, "Be strong and courageous, and do the work. Don't be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord God, my God, is with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. He will see to it that all the work related to the temple of the Lord is finished correctly. The various divisions of priests and Levites will serve in the temple of God. Others with skills of every kind will volunteer, and the officials and the entire nation are at your command." So we open today with David calling an assembly of all his officials, virtually anyone and everyone who has a place in David's government is called that day. This meeting, it would essentially be the equivalent of a State of the Union address today. So that should tell you that something fairly big is going on, that David is gathering all these important officials together in one place. I should probably also point out that at the time David calls this assembly, he's nearing the end of his reign. He's an old man at this point. He's not the spry young warrior we usually think of when we think of David. And to be honest, I think we're kind of given the impression that the years are starting to show on David at this point. That's actually part of why the Bible points out specifically that David stood up in front of everybody that day. This is a sign that, you see, there's also, on top of him being an old man, there's also some indication that he was just getting over some sort of illness. David's had it rough lately. He's not, no offense to anybody, but he's no spring chicken. So the fact that he gets up in front of everybody, that he specifically stands to give this address, this is a way of saying, I might be old, I might not have too much longer, but there's still some life left in these old bones, and I got something important to say. And the speech he makes that day is all about one thing: God's temple. So David opens by basically reminding everyone. They're probably familiar with the story of how David had wanted to build the temple, but he begins his speech by reminding everybody anyways that he had in mind to build God a temple, but that God had come to him and politely said, no. It's not right for a man of war to build a temple for a God of peace. As much as David was a man after God's own heart, there was just some things about the way he lived that didn't quite make it right for him to be the guy to do this work. You might actually remember us talking about this a couple weeks ago. You might also remember that God declining David's offer wasn't quite the end of the matter. David continues that just as God had chose him to be king over Israel out of all of his brothers, God now chooses Solomon out of all of David's sons to replace him as king, and that Solomon will be a man of peace. And so the task of building the temple will fall to him. You know, Solomon's very name marks him as a man of peace. Part of his name in Hebrew is based off of the word shalom, which means peace. So Solomon is marked from the beginning as a man of peace, the guy specifically designated to build God's temple. So after setting all of that up, basically telling people this is going to happen as soon as Solomon becomes king, David then brings a charge to the assembly. He tries to make them understand just how important what they're going to do next is. He tells them, you've got to be faithful to follow God and his commandments. He actually pulls a lot from this point forward in things from the book of Deuteronomy. A lot of what David says and what is essentially his farewell speech is pulled from Moses' farewell speech in the book of Deuteronomy. And so again, he reminds the people, just like Moses did way back then, if you don't follow God the way you should, it's going to come back to bite you. God's blessing will be removed from you if you're not following him with everything you got, and you'll wind up in exile. And he kind of pushes the idea that if they don't do this, it's not just them who are going to suffer, it's their kids who are going to miss out on the land that are going to suffer too. You definitely get the idea that David is very passionate about this. But then after bringing this charge to the assembly, he then turns to Solomon. And more or less he tells him the same thing. He warns Solomon that just how successful he's going to be as king all falls on how faithful he is to God. How faithfully he serves God. He also makes the point that Solomon can't actually hide anything from God. God knows our hearts and our minds better than we ourselves know them. So you can't follow God half-heartedly. You can't follow God for the wrong reasons. It all has a tendency to blow up in your face if you do. And that's what David's trying to warn Solomon about. And then he concludes this portion of the speech by reminding Solomon that he is called to a great task. God has specifically placed on Solomon's shoulders the job of building the temple. And from here he uses words very similar to what Moses said to Joshua when he was commissioning him. Be strong and do the work. Now at this point in proceedings, David kind of puts a pause on his speech, and he has a gift for Solomon. Now God did say that David couldn't build the temple, but he never said that David wasn't allowed to have any part in the building of the temple. So while David might not have got to set stone and mortar, he did get to draw blueprints. From what we see in this passage, it does seem that God uses David as the architect of the temple. Remember, an architect, his job isn't to set the materials in place and actually build the building. His job is to design it, figure out how everything fits together, and leaves the task of actually doing the building to somebody else. And so that's what we seem to have here. God divinely inspires David to put all of this together. And that's not all either. God did more than just inspire David to draw a bunch of pictures of buildings. But he also inspired David to put together almost every little nook and cranny of what was going to be needed to get the temple working. That means David, he comes up with this idea of how all of the different priests and Levites throughout the whole nation are going to be able to serve in the temple at any given time. He doesn't really mention it here, but we know from other spots in the Bible, David figures out the system of how to incorporate worshiping God with music into the temple. David also provides a list of all of the duties that the priests in the temple are going to have to do in order for everything to run smoothly. That takes a lot of thinking, because you know that there's a lot that goes into running a worship service for a place that big. And then on top of all of that, David includes instructions for making all the little implements that are involved in the sacrificial system and every other ritual in the temple. its tables, its lamps, and other such things. He even records the exact amount of gold and silver needed for every last item. And again, we come to a part that's not actually recorded in this passage today, but recorded elsewhere in the scriptures. David makes arrangements with one of the foreign kings that he's allied with to provide all the timber for the temple. And not just any timber either. We're talking cedars of Lebanon. That was like the gold standard of wood in those days. We're kind of left with the impression that David's doing everything he possibly can to make sure that there's as little that Solomon has to do in planning everything, and he can just go straight to work as soon as the crown's on his head. And all of this, David gives to Solomon. Everything's ready. It just remains for Solomon to do the work. And to that end, David ends with encouragement to his son. God will help him accomplish this task. God's the one giving Solomon the job of building the temple. That means God's going to make sure Solomon gets it done. He's going to help him to accomplish this. And while divine help is always more than enough to get the job done, the fact is Solomon's got plenty of human help available in this too. I mean, we're left with the impression that the priests and the Levites, they are just itching for this all to start. They're kind of like they're watering at the mouth to see the temple of God built. And if the priests and Levites pull their weight in getting all this done, that goes a long way in getting everybody else to pull their weight too. Kind of something that we see throughout the Bible. As goes the priests and the royalty in Israel, so goes the people. And on that note, David does say, the people will respond. Just as the God inspired so many artisans to help build the tabernacle at Mount Sinai, God's going to do the same here with the temple. And then you kind of get the idea that David's like saying, look out at all these people here before us today, son. Every last one of them is going to do what you tell them to do when it comes to building this temple. And you are the king. The people will respond to you for that, if nothing else. All of this can be done. It will be done. So don't be afraid, Solomon. Now, for a guy who never got to set stone and mortar or whatever else was involved in building the temple, David puts a lot of work into this. I've been studying the Bible for years, and it's only recently that I began to realize how much of a hand David had in this. For those of us who are familiar with the story, we hear that God tells David that he's not supposed to build the temple and that the job will go to Solomon instead. And I think we just start to think that all David does at that point is sit back on his laurels and do nothing. That couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, he couldn't build the temple. But we are given every impression that God used him as an instrument to make sure things still got done. All the prep work was done in the years before Solomon ever sat on the throne. Now, I know we don't really get the impression that David had all that many architectural leanings prior to this passage, but I can't help but look at David's life and think that it's not all that surprising that God would use him in such a fashion. The point of the temple was never about making a pretty building. Yes, it was phenomenal. It was fantastic. No recreation of the temple would ever be able to do justice to what Solomon actually built. But again, the point was never about making the place look nice. It was about worship. making a place where the whole nation of Israel could come together and give God the glory and honor he deserves. Spend time in God's very presence. And that was something right up David's alley. I think I mentioned this a few weeks back when we first started this series. But when it comes to material in the Bible, there's more that has some connection to David than virtually any other plain old human being throughout the entire Bible. And I'm not just talking about the sections of the Bible that cover events from David's life. Look at the book of Psalms. It's the largest book in the entire Bible, and it was the majority written by David. I think all the evidence points to the idea that David's favorite pastime was writing songs to God. He was probably the closest person I can think of in history after David, and just the amount of songs written, would be Charles Wesley. And that was a guy who his whole ministry was based around writing songs. David was doing all this songwriting and leading a nation. Some of David's songs were praise, just saying how amazing God was. Some were thanksgiving, thanking God for all he did. Some were lament, just pouring out all the hurt and pain he felt before God and letting God take it. Honestly, I think we look at David and we have to acknowledge that he had a song for nearly every possible occasion. And with David's artistic streak, it doesn't surprise me that God would use him to accomplish this phase of the task of building the temple. Even if he didn't get to build, that artistic streak that David had was just enough to get the ball rolling. And I think we look at David, we look at all the work he puts in here, everything that he charges to the people of the assembly and to Solomon. And that shows us just how important it is for us to consider how we go about worship. And again, that was the central point of the temple. Now, I'm not saying there's not room for spontaneity when we worship. We've got plenty of examples in the Bible of God doing something amazing and people just dropping everything and worshiping him on the spot. But the majority of the time we see worship happen in the Bible, there's a particular plan and a particular routine involved. I don't really think that should surprise us. God is a God of order, after all. It makes sense that he would appreciate a sense of routine and plan of action, even while also appreciating us being able to drop everything and worship him on the spot. We see in God that creativity and order don't necessarily have to be in contention, that they can work together. And look at the temple if you want an example of that. And look at the tabernacle before it. The layout of every room had a specific meaning, a specific purpose guided towards worshiping God. Every last decoration in both places of worship all pointed back to God in some way or another. Now, I know there are some people out there that they've kind of got this idea that order and routine are almost like the enemies of worship, that they root creativity out of the process at all. But in my own experience, and honestly what I think is we see played out in the Bible, especially when we look at the tabernacle and the temple, is that order and routine can actually prove as a way to help in getting worship done, and even done in the right attitude. When it comes down to it, there's two kinds of worship. The kind we're probably more familiar with, the one we think more about when we think of the word worship, is corporate worship. That's what we're doing here today. That's what we do when we come together on Sunday like we have today. I know there's many who have this misconception that worship is just the music. Worship is so much more. The music is an essential part, I'll grant. But the fact is, everything we do in church on Sunday morning is an act of worship. Everything in this entire service, from when we start greeting each other to our concluding benediction, all of these are little pieces of worship that amount to one big way of worship. All of it does one particular purpose too. Every little thing points us back to God. It's meant to help us grow in our relationship with Him in one way or another. That's why gathering together for worship is so important to our walk with Christ. So we can help draw each other deeper into that relationship. As our vice chair mentioned at the beginning of service, we come together in church on Sunday as a way to recharge our batteries. However, we recharge here not just so that we can deplete as the week goes on. I'll get into that in just a little bit. Real quick though, I just want to again emphasize, we see how important corporate worship is through the temple. I mean, that place was big enough, I don't think we know for sure how many people could actually fit in it on a given day. But the purpose of making the place so big was so that they could practically bring the whole nation together in it. All for the purpose of worshiping God. And wouldn't that be something to see today? Gathering all those many people together from all across the country just to worship God. Oh, I feel like that'd be a little taste of heaven right there. But I think that's also part of why we see David want to build the temple in the first place. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. Part of it was that David didn't feel right that he, as king, was living in this big, beautiful palace, and God's place of worship was essentially just a tent. But also, I think David recognized the importance of bringing everybody together for the purpose of worshiping God. Simple fact is, we can't worship God, we can't follow God completely on our own. There are aspects of the Christian walk that we do as individuals, and we go through that about every day. But some of the best work that we do as followers of Christ is done as a community, is done as family of God. That's what the temple was meant to do, to bring the people together with God, to give Him praise and glory and recognize the relationship that we have with Him and with each other through Him. We may no longer have the temple anymore, but God replaced the temple with something else, the church. And I mean more than just a building. I mean more than just all the little C churches that are dotted throughout the world. I'm talking the big C universal church. The one made up of every people from every nation, tribe, tongue, and denomination. When we come together to worship on Sunday, we're joining a much larger movement of people all across the globe. Yeah, we come together to worship as this church, but we are also one brick in a much larger temple. Every other church out there on Sunday morning being another brick in that. And that's something that's good for all of us, recognizing our piece of it and our role in the whole thing. But worship doesn't end when we walk out that door. If anything, that's where worship really begins. The fact is, if you're only worshiping on Sunday morning, you are missing out on so much. So many opportunities to connect with God. And this is that other kind of worship I mentioned earlier. This is individual worship. So again, going back to that image we had earlier about coming here to recharge our batteries. Yeah, we come here and worship and it recharges our batteries. But that's also meant to fuel moments of private and family worship that go on throughout the week. Those moments in turn are meant to keep us going until once again we're back here Sunday morning and worshiping again as the family of God. It's a never-ending cycle, and one that when you fully put your effort into it, really goes a long way in helping you grow and keeps you spiritually energized. And this may be this weekly way of praying with of worshiping with your families and on your own throughout the week. This may be more than any is where we see these ways of planning out and routining our worship. I mean, yeah, we do that here on Sunday morning, but the simple fact is most churches already have a set way of doing things. Some denominations think that it's best to do it one way, others another. I'm not going to get into all of that. But every church service has the goal of connecting people with God, as many people to God as they can through Sunday morning worship. But the simple fact is, no church is able to check every last box on how to get people to connect with God. At least not on Sunday morning. People are built differently from each other. We're not mere images of each other. We're not clones. We're not built the same. That means everybody connects to God just a little differently. I really wish I could remember the name of the book, but there's a book out there that describes there's at least 9 different pathways, 9 different general ways people connect with God. For some people, they connect best to God through nature. Others, it's music and the arts that connects them with God. For some, they do their best connecting with God through study. Others yet, service is where they feel closest to God. I could go on and on. I really wish I could remember that book so I could give you a little homework on how to figure that out. But the simple fact is, there's a number of different ways that we can connect to God that doesn't necessarily have to be coming here on Sunday morning. Don't you dare be skipping church based on what I'm just saying. I'm just saying there are ways that we can connect with God that help keep us moving between Sundays. And so I guess I will give you a little bit of homework this week in this. Figure out how you best connect to God. Figure out what your particular worship pathway is. And then start working on a plan to how you can incorporate that into your weekly, better yet, your daily routine. The more we connect with God, the more we worship, the better it is for us. Honestly, I think even the better we feel. Because the more we connect with God, the more we're connected with the very source of life and given the way to just keep moving forward. So if your pathway happens to be connecting to God through nature, find a way to take a walk in the woods or just get outside for a little bit. If music and the arts is the way you connect with God, then then listen to worship music as the week goes on. Sing along, or maybe find some other artistic project that helps you express how you feel about God. If study is the way that you connect best, then I would recommend finding a book or a series that helps you study and learn more about God and the Bible. If reading is something hard for you, find a Bible study video series that does that. If service, there's a number of organizations out there that find ways to help you help other people. Join them and volunteer. Or if being part of a big group isn't something that you care so much about, look around at the people around you in this building. Look at the people you know who need a little help. Find some way that you can help them. Figure out what your pathway is, which way you best connect to God, and work that into your daily life. And I'm sure you are going to see all kinds of positive changes. Whatever your personal pathway happens to be, I want to add one other thing. Daily reading the Bible. The Bible, we don't call it God's word for nothing. I mean, this is the primary way God chooses to communicate with his people today. So if we're not spending daily time in the Word, it's almost like going a day without hearing from God. I gotta admit, that scares me to no end. So, all of this goes down to one basic purpose. Worshiping God, both privately and corporately, it goes a long way to deepening our relationship with God, to ensuring we're on the right track and following the way we should. Basically, when we live a life of worship, that not only allows us so many ways to connect with God, it allows God so many ways that he can come in and make the necessary transformations to turn us into who he truly wants us to be. That's something we all should be striving for. So live a life of worship. Allow God the space he needs to transform you into the best possible you. Let us pray. Lord, again, we come before you and we recognize we don't always worship you in the right spirit. There are times we let the concerns of this life get in the way. There are times that we just go through the motions. And we want that to be over, Lord. Transform us as only you can, Lord. Help each and every one of us, both in this building today and who are watching this video. Help us to discover the way that we best connect with you and figure out a plan of how to work that into our routine so that we're constantly making connection with you and giving you the space you need in us to make us who you want us to be. Help us to live a life of worship. This we pray in your holy name. Amen.